It is well known that Sri Lanka was one of the few countries in the world where Buddhism has been practiced without interruption from the time of its introduction down to the present day. From the beginning of the historical period, which coincides with the introduction of Buddhism in the 3rd century BCE, Sri Lankan architecture was dominated by the requirements of Buddhism and by the desire of successive kings to demonstrate their power and acquire merit through erection of buildings for public purposes or display. Anuradhapura, Sri Lanka's first long-lived capital, is covered with religious monuments like Tuparama and Ranwali Mahasaya. They dominate the religious landscape of the sacred city. The Abhayagiri Vihara was the seat of Mahayana Buddhism, and in the 5th century, over 5,000 monks lived there. Jetavanaramagapa was the tallest stupa in the ancient world. Similarly, Polonnaruwa, Sri Lanka's second capital, is covered with religious monuments. The Galvihara, the jewel of Polonnaruwa, has 4 Buddha images carved into a rock face. Atadage and Hatadage were built to hold the tooth relic of the Buddha. Kirivera, built by the Queen Subhadra, stands 80 feet in height today. Lanka Tilaka Vihara is the pride of Lanka. Polonnaruwa Vatadage, centered around a small stupa, is a structure consisting of 2 platforms decorated with elaborate designs. The Midilgiriya Vatadage is one of the most beautiful Buddhist monuments of similar type, built on a natural rock. The Tivanka Pilimage and Manik Vihara are among many Buddhist monuments in Polonnaruwa. The Temple of the Tooth Relic in Kandy houses the relic of the Buddha's tooth. Since ancient times, the relic has played an important role in local politics. The Galduruwa, Hindagala and Madhivela temples bear beautiful paintings of the Kandyan period depicting scenes from the life of the historical Buddha and his previous lives, known as Jataka stories. Lanka Tilaka Vihara is somewhat similar to certain temples in Pagan in Myanmar. The fortified city of Yapauba, with its splendid stairway leading to the sacred Truth Relic temple in appearance, reminds us of Sigiriya, but it has very little in common with the Sigiriya complex. The most notable aspect of the Sigiriya complex of the Kashapan period is the total absence of any religious building. Even the small and short-lived capitals of Sri Lanka abound with Buddhist architecture. My attempt today is to show how the various characteristics of the Sigiriya complex are the result of various ideas and concepts from the outside world used to transform a huge, lofty rock into an elaborate, harmonious whole. The overall plan of the complex was clearly well thought out in all its details. With its pleasure gardens, similar to the classical charba or fourfold garden, model with paved paths, pavements, narrow water channels, pools, terracotta pipes feeding the fountains and draining excess water, summer palaces, ramparts and moats built mainly for aesthetic value. The facade of the rock, depicting the celestial maidens emerging from the clouds, and the top of the rock, where the palace was located, are reminiscence of an Alakamanda, the abode of a god king. As the title indicates, I'll be talking today about the amazing 5th century palace and pressure gardens of Sigiriya, a unique historical monument. I would like to thank the Director General of Archaeology, Andro Manatunga, and also the Cultural Fund, Gamini Ranasinghe, especially Nadika Premaratna, who worked with me to on the restitutions of the Sigiriya complex, and also Dr. Nuwana Bewardena and Kalpa Sangha for helping me with the drone. And they are they are my friends who did the drone images. For the first time, we have aerial views of Sigiriya. John Boisselier, who is one of the famous art historians in France, wrote, I quote, although much stress has been laid on the absence of large temples, comparable, for example, with the large Khmer and Indonesian complexes, and the poverty of Sinhalese rock cut architecture, compared with the Indian achievement, it is only fair to draw attention on the credit side to the astonishing skill in the organization of space and the feeling for classical structure, which is demonstrated as early as the 5th century AD by such enterprises as Sigiriya. Quotation ends. We all know where Sigiriya is situated. It's almost the center of the island. How Sigiriya came to be, the history behind the complex. The earliest evidence, archaeological evidence we have of Sigiriya are these caves. These were the residences of the monks, the first converts to Buddhism, dating back to the 3rd and the 2nd century BC. Looking at the Brahmi Akshara or Brahmi letters, paleographically, we can date them very easily, at least to the 2nd century BC. There are donor inscriptions. I'm just showing you some of them. And as they indicated, they were donations. And these are the first archaeological evidence for the existence of the Sigiriya complex. Sigiriya and these establishments were abandoned by the 1st century, and the jungle invaded the whole space. If we look at the history, and this is the history that we are interested in, the Chulavamsa, considered as the second part of the Mahavamsa, the chronicle written in Pali, King Dhatusena reunited the entire kingdom in 459 CE after a 26-year reign of 6 South Indian kings. Dhatusena had 2 sons, one named Mogallana, the youngest, born of the anointed queen, and the other Kashyapa, the elder son, of a consort of a lower rank. Following a series of violent and brutally cruel acts, Kashyapa became king in 477 CE. The Chulavansa further says, quote, but as he, referring to Kashyapa, was unable to slay his brother, he betook himself through fear to Sigiriya, which was difficult of ascent for human beings. He cleared the land about, surrounded it with a wall, and built a staircase in the form of a lamb. Thence it took its name, Sigiriya. After Kashyapa had ruled for 18 years, Mogallana, his younger brother, the heir to the throne, returned from India with an army. Kashyapa went out with his own forces to meet his brother on the battlefield, but a trivial incident decided the day against him. Kashyapa, seeing his army in flight, realizes that his capture was imminent and slit his own throat with his own dagger. After Kashyapa's death, Mogallana regained the throne and gave Sigiriya to the Buddhist clergy. The Buddhist monks obviously did not have a great love for this place. From that time on, the spectacular site was gradually enveloped by the advance of the jungle and was beset by the demolishing hand of time. So I'm showing you a slide of the Bodhigara, the shrine of the sacred Bodhi tree, excavated in 1980s by the Sri Lanka UNESCO Cultural Fund project conducted by Professor Senaka Bandaranaike. And this is also a stupa of the Moggallana period. The aesthetics as central driving force in the design of the complex. Now on, I'll be only talking about the Kashyapan period. The Chulavansa says, he collected treasures and kept them there well protected, and for the riches kept by him, he set guards at different places. Then he built there a fine palace worthy to behold like another Alakamanda, and dwelt there like the god Kuvera, the god of treasures. The whole complex of Sigiriya or Sigiri, the mountain of the lion, can be seen as the abode of a god king, built in a magnificent location, a natural steep-sided crack, skillfully incorporating the palace and gardens to impressive effect. The whole complex with royal residence, ramparts, gardens belong to the Kashyapan period, meaning from 477 to 495 of the Common Era. For the purpose of discussion regarding the plan and main characteristics of Sigiriya complex is divided into 5 zones. First, the Sigiri River, or the lake, the reservoir, the ramparts and moats, eastern precinct, western precinct with water gardens, rock gardens and terraces, and then the rock and the palace. The ingenious hydraulic system serving the moats and gardens. The hydraulics of Sigiriya complex provided water from the Sigiriya lake. H.C.P. Bell, the first archaeological commissioner during the colonial period, observed that Sigiri River, or the lake, was a massive reservoir of water, and it would have certainly been much larger in the past than today. According to Bell's estimation, the Sigiri River was about 2,000 hectares. The Sigiri Oya was the main irrigating canal of this artificial lake. Chandana Ellepula, the engineer who worked in 1980s on Sigiriya, who has done much contribution for our understanding, says, if the level of water in the Sigiri River could be maintained throughout the year above the 200 feet contour height, an adequate volume will be available to supply and activate the water gardens of Sigiriya complex. The western ramparts mark out a rectangle measuring 775 meters by 600 meters. The outermost rampart was constructed of earth. It is almost a trench. Then there is a middle rampart made of brick. These are all baked bricks. The innermost rampart, the most massive and longest, was built of rubble with a brickwork facing over a core of earth and stands at an average height of 10 meters. So it was quite high. So this is how we see from the aerial photograph the innermost rampart with the moat in front. In between two ramparts was a moat. Its depth is about 5 meters and width 24 meters at the bottom and 24 meters at the top. So if you go to Sigiriya, this is what you see. It's a little difficult to understand how it would have looked like because of the vegetation. So this is what we propose as a reconstruction of the ancient time of the moat and the two ramparts, one with brick and one with stone. The important thing is, in the whole Sigiriya complex, one is unable to see the naked bricks or the stones. They were all plastered and painted, perhaps painted in white or painted with colors. I will explain why I came to this conclusion. Again, another place of the moat. Behind we have the rampart covered by the jungle, and then the wall made of rubble, stone, and again plastered and painted. The rampart and moats of Sigiriya were built, I believe, mainly for their aesthetic value, but not for purposes of security. This is a misunderstanding we had. It was not a fortress. We can see, I have put you some photographs here. When the natural rock disturbs the digging of the moat, they left the natural rock. They didn't take any action to blast the rock. And sometimes the moat stops at one point and continues from another point. So this means to say, even a whole army would have invaded if it was a fortress. So this is one of the points that I want to raise during the discussion. The eastern defense are on a modest scale, consisting only of an earthwork measuring 430 meters by 690 meters. A barely perceptible depression in the ground provides evidence for the existence of a moat on the outer side of the eastern rampart. Some archaeologists thought that this area was occupied by the nobles and interpreted it as an urbanized area. The absence of any traces of buildings in the eastern precinct shows that this part was occupied by a park covered with trees. There are 4 gateways, looking at the 4 cardinal points. The north entrance, which is quite large and huge, even elephants can enter with the carts. Then the south entrance, same thing, very, very big and tall. So we imagine it looked like this. As I said earlier, elephants can enter. Since the brick wall had a plaster and it was painted, so this is what we would like to propose, how they looked like in the past. The western entrance was evidently the main gate. It consists of a ramp across the second moat leading to a gateway flanked by guard posts in the middle brick rampart. There may have been a drawbridge across the inner moat. A flight of steps over the innermost rampart gave access to the gardens. From this aerial photograph, we can see the western entrance with the axis. You can see it's a straight line up to the Boulder Gardens. This is how the entrance looks like today after the, reconstruction of some of the aspects or the conservation. So if you look at it, we can imagine different ways about how it looked like. So it certainly had a rubble stone wall, plastered and painted. It may have some sort of a passerelle, or it had a drawbridge like this. So this is the entrance, a flight of steps over the moat and over the rampart. Certainly it had a door like this, and the drawbridge gave access to a limited crowd, only the friends or the entourage of the king. Pleasure gardens, an attempt to mimic paradise on earth. The western precinct with water gardens, rock gardens, summer palaces and terraces. The part that I am discussing now is in the white frame. The excavations carried out in the mid-1980s exposed a garden unit of a hitherto unknown type that the Sri Lankan archaeologists named the miniature water gardens. The excavation of this garden revealed an elaborate network of structures, pavilions, pools, cisterns, courtyards, conduit, and watercourses. There are at least 5 distinct units in the garden, all combining buildings and pavilions of brick and limestone with paved water-retaining structures and winding watercourses. When you go to Sigiriya, you will see there is only one side is excavated. If you look towards the west gate, our left-hand side is excavated, the right-hand side is not excavated, the Department of Archaeology has decided to leave this space for the future archaeologists to excavate with modern techniques to come. But there is something absolutely certain. There is a symmetry in these gardens. What is on our left-hand side should be on the right-hand side. I mean, these are some of the pools and courtyards and the watercourses. So let us have a look at this structure, which is also repeated on the other side here. We can imagine it looked like this. So the pavilion inside where people could sit and enjoy the water garden. The structure would be sometimes around the watercourses, if you look at it like this. Or else, we can imagine the pavilion was inside and then the water flows around it, shallow water and on a paved surface like this. So this is the nature of the miniature water gardens. Something that we have to take into consideration is, even if you go to Sigiriya in a day with heavy rains, you will see these gardens will never get inundated. The reason behind this is the evacuation system, drainage system. The excess water will go to these cisterns, and from these cisterns, the excess water will go to the moat, from the moat to the Sigiriya river again. It's an ingenious way of controlling the water and also to feed all the channels in the miniature water gardens. The zone of pleasure gardens are characterized by a central island surrounded by 4 L-shaped pools, designed according to the ancient concept of a water garden or charba. Charba means 4-square plan of a Persian paradise garden with mainly the pools with an L shape. H.C.P. Bell, the first archaeologist who explored this area, I mean, he didn't excavate the water gardens. He was mainly interested in the paintings and the survey. But he saw the charba, the Persian shape of these quartet gardens. So on the left-hand side, the pools are excavated, some by Srila Pranavitana and the others recently in 1980s by the UNESCO Central Cultural Fund. On the right-hand side, the pools are not excavated there, as well as the miniature water gardens. So on a rainy day, this is how we see these pools. And if we imagine how it was in the past, so there were 4 L-shaped gardens with an island in the middle. So we remove the tree and we have the straight axis. And then all the walls were plastered and painted. So what we do now is we take the miniature gardens on the left-hand side and paste them on the right-hand side. As I said earlier, there is absolute symmetry in all these gardens. Not only they are geometrical, but they are also symmetrical. And then they were plastered and painted. The water would have first come directly from the lake into a storage cistern, and from there through an inlet chamber into the pool by Kotel. So if you go to Sigiriya on a rainy day, the water will automatically come from the lake, and this is the outlet. So we can imagine it looked like this in the past with the plastic wall. The causeways, ambulatory and sides of the island are faced with brick, while flights of limestone steps lead down from the causeway into the tank. So this is one. Looking at the causeways in Shalimar Gardens, we thought it would have looked like this, the brick, and then plastered. So with this causeway, you can go into the pools. You can see the staircase coming from here, and then the people can go into the pool, and the king and his entourage. So we can imagine it was like this with the plastered walls. And this is a pool, again with the plastered wall. So this is the aerial photograph, and this is what we would like to propose. As I said earlier, absolute geometry and symmetry. The water gardens excavated on the right-hand side will be found, in the future, if the future archaeologists work there, they will exactly find the same thing, identical. Same thing with the charba, only the right-hand side, as we can see on the slide, are excavated, not the left. But if you excavate firmly the left-hand side, you will get absolute symmetry. Each garden element is separated by a wall and a gate. So for miniature water gardens, in the white frame, you have one wall. And from the charba, there is another wall, which is in the blue color frame. The reason why I told you at the beginning that all the constructions or the big walls were blasted and painted is because of this. We are very fortunate to have this part of the building which is covered today for security reasons, and we can imagine how the whole garden complex looked like. Today we see bricks, but those days there were no bricks to be seen. They were all plastered and painted. Then we come to the fountain gardens. Leading from the four pools, charba, is a walled enclosure that we saw with the gateway. To the north and south of this walled enclosure were two rectangular extensions containing shallow pools. So this is how we see them, again with the absolute symmetry from the aerial photograph. Draining into these pools are shallow serpentine streams paved with marble curbs. Underground channels and cross channels were built to supply water under pressure to fountains formed by circular limestone plates with numerous perforations. They operate on a simple principle of gravity and pressure. I quoted 11. So this is what we see when you go to Sigiriya with the pools. And here is the pressure chamber. Water came from the lake and also from the rock. There is also an ingenious way of evacuating water from the rock. So they all came to the pressure chamber, and with the pressure, they go into the fountains. So you can see the circular limestone plates with numerous perforations. These are the original ones. And if you go on a rainy day, you can see they begin to work again. If there is a real pressure of water, this can go up to about 2 feet. So if you look at these symmetrical gardens, this is how they look like today. And we can imagine this is how they looked like in the past. On either side of the fountain garden, there are 4 summer palaces. They are surrounded by high rubble walls and wide moats. Access to the summer palaces was by way of bridges cut into the surface rock. The water pavilions were erected on the leveled surface of partially built up bedrock. Holes still visible on the ground indicate that the pavilions were made of wood. Almost all the palaces and the pavilions in Sigiriya complex, as well as in Anuradhapura, I'm talking about the royal complexes, not the monasteries, they were made of wood because wood is more noble. So we can see from the aerial photograph 2 summer palaces in the 2 frames, and these are the walls and the moats surrounding the summer palace. I am just showing 2 of them. We can imagine the pavilion this way, with of course the plastered walls, or more complex one. One can appreciate the geometry of its layout and the precise application of the principle of symmetrical repetition. So it's a symmetrical repetition. What you find on one side of the axis, main axis, will be found on the right hand side. From here, we come to what we call the Boulder Gardens. The section of the vast pleasure garden is broader than the second, and the hitherto symmetrical garden becomes irregular due to the unevenness of the ground in this area. So these are the stones fallen from the main rock. During the Kashyapin period, all these rocks were taken into the architectural complex. I'll show you a few examples. The terrace garden leads to the upper terrace, known as the boulder garden because of the existence of many boulders which house rock shelters. The upper surfaces bear a profusion of grooves and ledges which indicate that they supported buildings in ancient times. I'm just showing you one here. You can see these grooves. They are not steps, but these are the grooves made to hold the bricks, like here. So we have to imagine buildings. For this part is gone today. We don't know how they look like, but certainly there would have been some residences and pavilions and other structures. Here also you can see these grooves and profusions here. That means they were all built with brick structures. There is an octagonal pond. And also there are nearly 30 caves in this area, many with Buddhist inscriptions dating back to the 3rd or the 2nd century BC. We have discussed this earlier. These caves were transformed into luxurious shelters during the Kashyapin period. The fragmentary wall paintings visible on some of these rock shelters are very similar to those of the main fresco on the main rock face. This means to say all the caves, the 30 caves where Buddhist monks lived in the 3rd, 2nd and the 1st century BC, and they were abandoned. During the Kashyapin period, they were remodeled as residences with the outer wall that you can see here, and also the paintings. This is one cave, still with the traces of paintings, where you can see the damsels, so the apsaras, like on the main fresco. We will come to that in a moment. And also the vegetation, the trees and flowers. So it's not only apsaras. And there's a pavilion housing a rock-cut throne. The photograph was taken in 1897 or 98 by H.C.P. Bell. This is how it looked like. This part was purposely cut into two to make this audience hall. As you can see, there are post holes for the construction of the room. Underneath, it's like a cave, and it's also painted. And some, as I told you, you have human figures, and also the trees and flowers, and also geometrical paintings and designs, like here. So we can imagine the whole complex with different types of paintings. Then we start climbing. On our right-hand side, photograph taken at the end of the 19th century by H.C.P. Bell, you can still see the flight of steps. And these are the same steps which were restored, in recent years, first by Parnavitana and during the time of Ronald Silver. When describing the function of the boulder gardens at Sigiriya, Daud Ali observes bowers and grottos were the rooms or apartments within the garden. They contain, if you follow literary sources, swing, dola, seats, vedika, and inlaid floors, manibhumika. Bowers and grottos were places of seclusion, places where lovers could conduct their amorous liaisons in secrecy. It is within bowers and caves that lovers often met for their trysts. Then we come to the Sigiriya wall paintings, the largest picture gallery in the world. The famous paintings on the land rock should be considered part of the garden concept of Sigiriya. The surviving paintings are found in a depression on the rock which is located 100 meters above the ground level. Fortunately, we have it, these 21 paintings, but we don't have, we don't have an idea how they look like in the past. According to John Still, the whole face of the hill appears to have been a gigantic picture gallery, the largest one in the world, covering a surface of 13,500 square meters. So this is how the rock looks like. In these pockets, you can still see the plasters, and this is the grid line, and this is where the paintings are today. Taking those paintings and pasting them on the rock, we can imagine how it looked like. I don't need to say that they all look like the 21 remaining paintings, but it's much similar. As Parnavitan observed, there is evidence that below the drip line, this is the drip line, cut between the top and the gallery, meaning to this gallery, the whole of the western face of Sigiriya rock was plastered and painted. This is how H.C.P. Bell discovered the remaining paintings of the fresco. And with his children and wife. This book was written by the granddaughter of H.C.P. Bell, with beautiful photographs of that period. You can see the labor force in 1896. They are not well-trained archaeologists or workers, but he used the workforce available to him. I had the pleasure of meeting and discussing for hours and hours with Bettia Bell. She was working in the London University Library. So I learned a lot about these explorations of her grandfather. Plaster was prepared with the clay of termites and paddy husks. 3 colors were used: green, yellow, and red. So we can see, they are very close to the nature as far as the human figure is concerned, and also the flowers they hold. So she is opening a utpala, a blue lotus, and also holding the rose-colored lotuses, or the white-colored ones as well. And then one flower, which is from Shipan, or the temple tree flower, as they are called in Sri Lanka, or Aralia. And if you look at what she is holding, and these are also flowers which can be found in the nature in Sri Lanka. The earring inside the earlobe is something very characteristic. We know about the existence of this custom in Chiang Mai in Thailand. So we can see inside the earlobe you have the earring. And then they are shown emerging from the clouds, semi-nude, and throwing flowers as if someone is walking underneath, meaning the gallery. So this is how they hold the flowers before throwing them. And one is holding a plateau or a basket full of flowers, and the other lady is throwing them. These are, there are paintings of similar type in the Roman world, in Pompeii and also in Rome, where you can see damsels, they are in the sky and they are throwing flowers downward. There should have been some sort of a Roman inspiration, but I can't prove it. But there are other motifs in Sri Lankan art where the Roman inspiration is evident. So anyhow, what I want to say is that this aspect of throwing flowers to a dignitary is well known. The identity and style of execution of Sigiriya damsels have been much discussed. Dell, from observing that all the female figures were shown moving north, interpreted them as devotees setting forth to worship at the temple of Pidurangala. It's very difficult to hypothesize because there are also figures looking at the south, not only at the north. As I said from the beginning, Sigiriya was not a religious monument, it's a secular monument. Pidurangala, yes, Pidurangala is a religious monument. I think it has nothing to do with Pidurangala because Sigiriya was, and the Sigiriya complex was completely a secular one. A.K. Kumaraswamy, born Sri Lankan, one of the best art historians of our time, proposed that the figures were apsaras in the likeness of princesses, accompanied by maidservants carrying trays of flowers. Panavitana, for whom I have a great respect, thought that the female figures were the personification of clouds and lightning. The dark complexioned ones were thus cloud themselves, Megha or Meghalata, and the fair-skinned ladies were lightning princess Vijayakumari. The damsels rising from clouds, some of golden complexion, and the others dark-skinned, were the lightning princess and cloud damsels who helped to create the illusion that Sigiriya was Mount Kailasha, where God Shiva resides. Such a huge fresco makes real sense when one visualizes it in a three-dimensional perspective, which was Panavitana's ingenious theory, according to which the Sigiriya complex as Alaka connected the cloud-born figures with many of the structural and topographical features of the site. The marked similarity in the style of painting, pose, and ornament between the Sigiriya figures and those at Ajanta of the same period has already been referred by Bell, who was of the opinion that the artists trained in the same school were responsible for both the Indian and Sigiriya paintings. Even if one accepts, as H.P. Bell says, that artists trained in the Ajanta school were responsible for Sigiriya paintings, as far as the theme, technique, and color combinations of Sigiriya paintings are concerned, India has no equivalent. The Ajanta tradition certainly underwent a remarkable evolution at Sigiriya without being a mere repetition of Indian models. One thing we have to bear in mind, in Sigiriya, all the paintings are secular, and in Ajanta, all the paintings are Buddhist. So we have two, on our left-hand side, a Sigiriya Apsara, on our right-hand side, a painting from Ajanta. Benjamin Rowland, one of the greatest art historians in the world at that time, highlights the uniqueness of Sigiriya paintings in very clear terms. I quote, "The Sigiriya paintings, outside of their existing and intrinsic beauty, are perhaps most notable for the very freedom they show at a period when the arts were tending to become more and more frozen in the mold of rigid canons of beauty. The Apsaras have a rich, healthy flavor that, by contrast, almost makes the masterpieces of Indian art seem shallow and effete in over-refinement. Just as the drawing is more vigorous than that of the more sophisticated artists of India, so the colors are bolder and more intense than the tonalities employed in the temples of Deccan. I mean, referring to Ajanta mainly. The loudness of color approaches but escapes vulgarity. In this respect, it has much of the same bright and open charm that, for example, a peasant textile has in comparison to the stuff on the more sophisticated looms of the city." Quotation ends. I am working on the early paintings of Sri Lanka. The reason why I started the research was while reconstructing or restoring the Jetwanarama Stupa, which is dated to the 3rd century, the archaeologists found this fabulous painting of Kubera, the god of wealth, four-handed, with similar colors of Sigiriya, and also the paintings of the Ayaka, the frontispieces looking at the four cardinal points, and also the relic chambers of the stupa. There was a big tradition of painting in Sri Lanka which we need to discuss, we need to take into consideration, which I would not do today, but just bear in mind, we need to dig into this past of paintings of Sri Lanka. In summer 2004, while cleaning the external side of the mirror wall Some traces of paintings similar to the ones on the surface of the rock were discovered. I was there with Dr. Vijay Pala, who was the Director General of Archaeology. He kindly invited me to come with him. So we just walked along the pathway. There was a passage, and I was there when they were cleaning. These paintings appeared on the surface. So I took many photographs, but half an hour later, they all disappeared with the sun over it. Another important fact is that the mirror wall, because it's called mirror wall because there is a reflection of the paintings in front of it. So we have to imagine the paintings were here. On these paintings, there are graffiti. These are poems written by the first tourists of Sigiriya. They were all locals. So they came, of course, at this time, we are talking about the 7th, 8th, and the 9th centuries. People knew about the site, although the site was abandoned and covered with vegetation. They came, they saw the paintings, and they wrote these poems. So we have to imagine there were paintings on the surface. As I told you, the whole surface was painted. And this is a photograph of the access to the mirror wall or the gallery during the time of HCP. So I'm not going to read all the poems because there are over 2,000 poems. Hail, I am Veera Vidurabato. I wrote this. Wet with cold dewdrops, fragrant with perfume from the flowers, came the gentle breeze, jasmine and water lily, dance in the spring sunshine, sidelong glances of the golden-hued ladies stab into my thoughts. Heaven itself cannot take my mind, as it has been captivated by one lass among the 500 I have seen here. So this poem is extremely important because the beauty of the poem, because these are the first manifestations of Sinhala poetry. And the other thing is that it clearly says in Sinhalese, Pansiya Aganan Risise Dakimi. That means, I have seen 500 damsels. That means, in the 7th century, when these tourists, local tourists went there, the facade was covered with paintings. It could be 500, it could be more than 500 or less, but there were more than 21. There's another one, Budalmi, Siva Ami, Sigiri Belimi, Belu Balu Bodina Gilu Nolim. I am Budal, came with all my family to see Sigiriya. Since all the others wrote poems everywhere, I didn't. Who is not happy when he sees those rosy palms, rounded shoulders, gold necklaces, copper-hued lips, and long, long eyes? Youth gets itself crushed by old age. The body afflicted by numerous maladies. Life necessarily spends itself and departs. Here stands, as it were, being have none of these conditions. The ladies who wear golden chains on their breast beckon to me. Now I have seen these splendid ladies, heaven has lost its appeal for me. So that means people were talking about these apsaras. We need to bear in mind the poets or the tourists or the people or the visitors who wrote these poems could not have seen the remaining paintings that we see today. They are about 100 meters above the ground. So they were looking at the facade of the old rock and the paintings. A deer-eyed maiden of the mountainside arouses anger in my mind. In her hand she holds a string of pearls, and in her eyes she has seen rivalry with me. Having come here, having seen them, death does not perturb me. This damsel, like unto fluttering tender bud, in fact became one who spoke with the buds and flower in her hand. It is therefore an untrue word that has been said, the ladies do not speak. We saw at Sigiri the king of lions, whose fame and splendor remain spread in the whole world, and the wonderful damsels with eyes like blue lilies. So these are some of the points. Now, through the gallery, we go to the palace on a rock, a unique case in the history of mankind. So this is the entrance facing the north. The lower terrace, only the posts of colossal brickland flank the foot of a staircase survive as a reminder of the land staircase house which led to the summit of the rock. These are original steps. When Bell was excavating the site end of the 19th century, as we can see on this photograph, all the brick structures were plastered and painted. So you can imagine how beautiful it would have been. Unfortunately, today they are all gone, only little bit is remaining. So we can imagine different ways. We enter from the mouth of the lion, and there's a corridor-like thing in the staircase. We can still see the traces of construction. And also, we can imagine something, face of a lion more ferocious, and the whole thing was plastered. And if you look very carefully, these are the posts of the lion. We can see the original staircase, and then it would have gone like this. And here is again original steps, and then we go into the palace and the other structures. The palace stands 360 meters above the mean sea level and 200 meters above the surrounding plateau. The area covers over 3 acres, 1.5 hectares, running longwise from north to south. Every available space on the summit had been made use of by the architects in planning the surface. The different levels are used in an ingenious way. The layout takes the form of terraces, largely brick-built and occasionally faced with stone, connected by paved pathways and flight of steps. I'm showing you the photographs taken during the excavations at the end of the 19th century by Bell and how they look like today. As you can see, the original excavation, there were many structures, most of them were removed. And also the other biggest handicap we have is that there are no plans. So it's very difficult to understand how the summit looked like. We only hypothesize from what we see today and what Bell has seen in the 19th century. The gardens continued the natural rock and finished in stucco face brick. The whole elaborate complex laid out on different levels and bound by brick walls was served by contrived arrangements for drainage and the disposal of rainwater. So this is how it would have looked like. Now the question about the palace. It looks very small compared to the other buildings. And also, if you believe, this is the foundation. And this is something like a pavement with stones where water was flowing around. If you look at the original plan during of course, these structures are gone. It's very difficult to get an idea. So the photograph is taken from this side. And this should have been the palace. And this is the foundation. And this is what we see here. So it's very difficult to get an idea. What we know, and this is also on the surface of the rock, there is a throne cut into the rock, and also the post holes. These are 4 wooden posts. So it means to say there was a roof made of wood. And this is something very similar in the whole structure, whole complex of Sigiriya. Same thing here. The audience hall, you can see the post hole. So there would have been certainly a roof, because you can't stay there when the sun really shines during the day. And the question one may ask is, where do they live? I mean, where did they live in the past? And there is one here, the apartments, maybe of the nobles or the maidens. And the point beyond this is not excavated. It's very difficult to get an idea. The whole Sigiriya complex is not completely excavated. I mean, I think it's only 10% of the whole surface. And also you can see these structures here. Other thing is the caves, as I told you earlier, there are more than 30 man-made caves, and they were converted like this, building a wall, and they were painted. So these are the places where I don't, I may not use the word live, where people stayed, the invitees and the entourage of the king. We can, looking at the palace, we can go from a simple structure of this type to a more complicated structure, 2 or 3 floors, surrounded by water, or like this. But the question is, in Sri Lanka, apart from the Kandyan period constructions, we have no idea about the wooden uh, palaces in Sri Lanka. Normally, because of the humidity of the country, they don't survive. And the second question is that we don't have any illustrations of these. I mean, I hope one day with the research we do on the paintings, we may be able to find some of the, paintings depicting those wooden palaces. I was looking at the palaces at Sanchi and Barut. As you all know, they are not wooden palaces. They are, I mean, made with solid structures like brick and mainly stones. So this is how the surface looked like with the palace here and open gardens and the throne here and a pool and the cistern. So we can imagine it looked like this in the past. And if you plaster the walls, this is how it would look. So it's not a residence really, it's a place of enjoyment. The king would have gone with his entourage and the nobles and stayed there, enjoying pleasures, taking a bath, or looking at the damsels, so dancing, and other, curiosities that one could expect. When the most important features of the complex are examined, it becomes clear that the whole layout was planned as a whole. The elaborate set of structures at Sigiriya demonstrate a level of technical skill that is hardly to be expected from the buildings of earlier periods. Knowing that he would never be forgiven by the Buddhists for his crime, Kashyapa would have taken refuge in this rock and would have converted the whole site into a secular establishment. It is not religious. In accordance with this notion, Senra Panavidhana interpreted the whole complex of Sigiriya as Alaka in the Himalayas and Kashyapa as Devaraja, or Lord of the Alaka, or the god of the gods, or Kuera, or his representative on earth. The Gardens of Sigiriya, a local masterpiece inspired by concepts of Persian gardens. Despite the huge chronological difference, the L-shaped Gardens of Sigiriya remind us of Mughal Charbagh, or 4 gardens divided by water channels at right angles. Mughal gardens were introduced to India by the Mughal Emperor Babur after 1526, using an Iranian schema. The Charbagh was the ideal garden, the earthly paradise, providing coolness and shade to offset the heat. So this is a plan of the Agra Taj Mahal, Taj Gardens, with the Charbagh in the middle. In Persia, the concept of gardens as an integral part of the royal palace complex can be traced back to the time of Cyrus, around the middle of the 6th century BC. One of the dominant ideas of the concept was to create a landscape which include architectural elements. From this evolved the landscape garden, later popularly known as Charbagh. Until only a few years ago, it was still prevalent opinion that the celebrated garden carpets of the 6th century of Safavid Iran provided the oldest extant evidence for the form of the Persian garden. From the appearance of such carpets, it was already clear that Safavid gardens included numerous water channels, multiple parterre, and centrally placed garden pavilion, which often stood within a rectangular pool on the long axis of the plan. So here we have the Charbagh and the rest of the gardens with birds and trees. Recent archaeological work in Iran, however, has revealed the much earlier beginnings of Persian garden construction, including the characteristic presence of Charbagh pattern like that at Sigiriya. Thanks to David Stronach's excavations at Pasargade. David was a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and he worked in Pasargade, and he was a dear friend who passed away recently. I had many discussions with him comparing his gardens with the Sigiriya gardens. So the Pasargade, the capital of Cyrus the Great, 6th century BC, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, it is now possible to detect the origins of Persian garden design 2,500 years ago. The quadripartite plan of the Royal Garden of Cyrus at Pasargade can be seen as an expression of new geometrical articulation. So this is how they look like in the 6th century BC. Sigiriya gardens are of the 5th century CE, and the Mughal gardens 1000 years after, that means 16th, we include Timur, 15th and 16th, 17th centuries. It is clear that Sasanians, who deliberately borrowed many concepts from the Achaemenids, built many elongated axial palace gardens with long canals or pools. The Sasanians also chose to emphasize, as did the Seljuks long after them, the close association between palace, pavilion, and garden, and indeed it can be suggested that the Sasanians' huge elongated gardens would have required the introduction of fourfold designs of a new complexity. The Persian merchants came to Sri Lanka, also called Lion Country, the island of rubies, where they purchased gems. Sri Lanka's continuous trade contacts with Persia and Central Asia are revealed by recent discovery of Sasanian ceramics, bullae, and coins in Manthai, Anuradhapura, and Samara. I published some of these coins, and also the cast rails excavation report of Manthai refers to these discoveries. Osmus, Indian navigator, refers to a Nestorian community of Persian merchants who were well established on the island. Vajrabodhi, the Indian esoteric Buddhist monk, traveled to the Tang Kingdom in China on board 35 Persian ships that traded in precious stones in Sri Lanka. Vajrabodhi boarded the ship at Beruvada, and these ships were going to the Tang dynasty. This interesting episode, which took place in the 8th century CE, reveals much about the seafaring in the Indian Ocean. We need to bear in mind, during the 5th century, during the time of Kashyapa, only ocean known to the Greeks and Romans and Persians was the Indian Ocean. Of course, they knew about the Caspian Sea and also about the Mediterranean Sea, but they have not ventured to the Atlantic Sea, and they have no idea about the Pacific Ocean. Only by the 8th century, the Chinese came to the eastward, Sri Lanka and Ethiopia. And before that, only Sri Lankan ships went there as early as the 4th century. In Persia, where we find the earliest traces of Mughal gardens, there was a precise reason for creating the atmosphere of a paradise. In the hostile desert, these gardens rendered the celestial surroundings with waterfalls, fountains, pavilions, and shady trees. The concept of paradise as garden is one of mankind's oldest ideas. The paradise promised in the Quran consists of several terraces of gardens, each more splendid than the last. The ancestors of Mughal, Timur, took great pride in the gardens he built. Timur's gardens, with the watercourses representing the 4 rivers of life, became famous worldwide. I am showing you the gardens in Shalimar, in Lahore, built by Shah Jahan, with all these characteristics. Built in 1642, these gardens consist of 3 tiers composed of pavilions, ponds, pools, waterfalls, and more than 400 fountains. These gardens were used as a palace, and a court. The emperor often used the building as his residence and spent weeks at a stretch. Again, I am showing you a few photographs from Pinjore, designed by Fidi Khan, Aurangzeb's trusted lieutenant and architect in the 17th century. I am referring to this text. The Samakya Ayyar, an ancient Persian romantic folklore story, makes allusions to four different functions of a royal garden. First and foremost, it is traditionally a place of enjoyment, where the return of spring, the most pleasant of all the seasons, is celebrated, and where close ties are made by renewed nature and with the pleasure of open air. The garden is also a place of access. It provides the means of entering the palace, the official entrance of which is well guarded, making it difficult to penetrate secretly up to the places particularly well protected. The garden could also be considered as a meeting place for lovers. Finally, the garden also appears as a place of refuge. The Sigiriya complex has the potential to fulfill all these requirements. According to the same text, Samakya, the royal garden is completely protected and totally isolated from the outside world by a huge wall. This is what we see in Sigiriya. The privacy of the garden inside the enclosure was strictly limited to the king and the nobles. It is also happening in Sigiriya. The presence of artificial fountain, gardens, summer palaces, and their close association with water evoke a paradise-like atmosphere. Sigiriya. The king considers that he is shielded from intruders if he is surrounded by maidservants, enjoying his innocent and lawful pleasures. In conclusion, the vast complex of Sigiriya is characterized by many exceptional features. The facade of the rock depicting the celestial maidens rising from the clouds, and the top of the rock where the palace was located are evocative of an Alakamanda, the abode of a god king. Its ramparts, its fountains, and miniature water gardens with pebbled or marble floors covered by shallow, slowly moving water creating the impression of a mirror, pools symmetrically arranged in charbar, and its summer palaces surrounded by water, transforming them into a well-ventilated, pleasant refuge from the sun, remind us of the atmosphere of a paradise attested in the popular literature of medieval Iran and evoked by the gardens of the great Mughals. Above all, the contribution of the Sri Lankan artists and architects who built Sigiriya is unique in human history. I thank you very much.